Welcome to 1.5 Degrees, the podcast where together we explore the science, stories, and solutions involved in the fight against climate change. I'm your host, Heidi Pan, speaking with the professionals behind the latest research, policies, culture, and innovations shaping our response to global environmental challenges. For today's episode, we are joined by Philips Dybwad, who is an urbanist, tech humanist, and adaptation strategist, to discuss green infrastructure, enhancing climate resilience, nature-based solutions, and the intersections between climate policy and corporate strategy. Carl is currently undertaking his Master's of Environmental Management at the Yale School of the Environment, researching advanced urban design strategies as a catalyst to foster hyperlocal action in the fight against climate change and developing green infrastructure intervention for the progress of net zero cities and the future of Amsterdam with the MIT Senseable Amsterdam and the AMS Institute. Carl, it's such an honor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here, and it's fun hearing all these words you have about me. Yeah, it's been very cool work. I'm so excited to now talk with you about all the things I do. Being in Amsterdam now for 3 months, but then also back in the US, trying to bring what I've learned in my master's program into practice now with MIT has been super fun. Looking at what I started in when I came here in May, and thinking this is going to be an impossible research project, like looking into green infrastructure and looking into green walls and all these things, which I kind of talk a lot about, but never actually know the science behind. So now looking right now, I actually have numbers if these things are effective and making air quality better and being carbon sequestering tools. So it's fun to see how this summer has been for me, and then actually getting the science behind it, because it's so often just talk from me and not so much like what's the actual numbers. So for once I had to go out of my little comfort zone of just talking and actually doing some research, which was very exciting as well.
Yeah, no, I've always I recently did this research just to see what it's like, because it was about a topic that I was, just reading about kind of casually, but I was I kind of want to challenge myself to know a little more about it, and research definitely does that. And it was a lot more than I expected, but I don't know, that was pretty fun. And I'm definitely looking forward to talking about kind of your research topics and kind of what you've learned in the process. For sure. I guess yeah. And I mean, it's been a while since we've last spoken, but I really enjoyed our conversation, so I'm super excited for this one. I guess kind of, could you start by talking about kind of what you're doing now, what you're kind of I guess closing off on, or just what some stuff like that?
Yes. So well, my practice, my theoretical background essentially is that, well, I did my whole undergrad in political science, and I was very certain I wanted to work in politics and governance of the climate change and of climate crisis. And I went to COP in Glasgow, and I just felt that the international system and the multilateral system was so slow of dealing with climate change. And I know a lot of people have different ideas and different thoughts about multilateralism as a tool to fight climate change, but I just felt that all these agreements didn't really get us anywhere. So when I came to Yale and to my master's, I was very certain that I wanted to do a more practice-based approach to climate change. And I felt that cities was that tool that we could use. I think looking at cities as a tool to combat climate change, cities shouldn't be a factor in the climate change crisis, but it should be something that we can use to actually minimize climate change. So I kind of was always doing courses on cities, urban growth, on architecture in cities, and then architecture and the climate crisis essentially. But I felt that I was doing all this talk about we should do green walls, we should build green roofs, or we should have parks or trees or all these things, right? Whereas I very often actually didn't know the implications of the things that I was recommending. So when I was looking for some internships, I was thinking, what is a place that is both forward thinking and forward looking in terms of perhaps not so much in the conservation space, but more into how can we use data and technology to create better cities. So kind of the tech humanism part, how do we create technology that's working for humans? But then I found that the MIT Senseable City Lab, which now operates, of course, in Boston at MIT, in Amsterdam, work with the City of Amsterdam, and then in Dubai, just open as well, works with bringing technology, sensors specifically into cities, and get a lot of testing, a lot of data, accumulates this data, and then looks at the data and see, well, can we actually draw conclusions based on the data sets we have? So that was very new to me. I'm not a data person, but I saw that I could perhaps actually then learn new things, learn coding or learn new data tools, and try to apply it in climate change and cities. So what I was doing is that I always preach about, I said about green walls, green infrastructure, green roof, right? But I was like, do they actually work? There's so much skepticism towards spending money and investing money in green infrastructure, especially because of the like highly politicized environment that climate is right now. So it's like, can we actually prove that there is a significant effect, and I'm like stressing significant effect on green infrastructure in human-centric research and human-centric, let's say, livable communities. So what I'm specifically doing is that I'm looking at air quality and impact that green walls have on air quality. So I think we all know that, like, okay, green walls and green sequester carbon, so they take in carbon, but we don't always know how they interact with pollution and air quality. So when I was also like, our lab is very focused on what's called human-centric design, essentially. So everything, all the research we do is related to humans in a way. What we're doing was essentially doing, we had a beautiful lab setting out there in Amsterdam with the green wall, and we had an exactly similar courtyard without the green wall. So we could test very similarly. We brought in a pollution source that was a car that would just drive in circles around this green wall and in front of this green wall. And we could then see after 30 minutes, are the pollution level higher or lower in the green wall courtyard, and how are they then affecting in the non-green wall courtyard? So the results are not fully done, but I think it looks very promising so far. I think what we're seeing is that green walls might have a very good impact on air quality. So to the end point where you can tell policymakers with the data we have that if you're looking for a green infrastructure intervention that will make it better for humans to live in cities, if pollution is still going to continue to rise, green walls can be a tool that you can use, and you can also be then certain that it will actually have an impact on humans. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're looking at testing theses about things that are commonly perceived as good, but we don't know. Another example could be trees in cities. A lot of people just think that trees are doing amazing work, and trees are great for cities. But an example is also how if you have too many trees in a courtyard or in a like small alley, trees actually slow down the airflow so much that the pollutants stay longer in the air and lower in the air, which means that trees in small alleys create worse air quality for humans. So trees are great for carbon sequestration, but they're horrible or bad for humans in cities somewhere. So just testing out this thing and just not saying, oh, this is good, period. We know that's the fact. I think it's more that we actually want to test out theses that are commonly perceived as doing great things. So green walls, green roofs, trees is what my whole summer has been about, essentially.
Oh my gosh, wait, that's actually something I didn't know. And I mean, that just goes to show like the importance of like research and actually having the data to, kind of back up what we're trying to like push towards in terms of like solutions. Because I mean, I've heard all these great things about green walls. I've celebrated this recently I went to Philly and I saw like green roofs everywhere and I was so excited by that. But I mean, like there's that kind of like personal gap in knowledge. Like I didn't know kind of the science behind it and how effective it actually was, or if it was just kind of like, just something new or something, and it's something very, very, very specific of me. But no, that made total sense. And I'd love to get into kind of like the nitty-gritty of the research as well later. But we had a chat that I found super exciting about your background in terms of like why specifically cities that you work on, and like being interdisciplinary. Could you maybe go into more of your background in terms of that and how you came to be interested in cities and climate adaptation in particular?
That's a good question because as I said, I used to be very much in this political space, and one thing is that these treaties don't work in my opinion. The second point is that my education, of course, in politics, I did some design at some point. And then when I was looking for a place where all of these things can come together, because of course, climate change will happen at all fronts across all scales. So I think you need multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary leaders, which then looks at topics like in all these different ways. Climate change will happen in design, in health, and economics, and every subject, essentially. And because I had this background, some in politics, some in design, some with my urban planning, I was like, well, what is the field where all of these things come together? Cities. I think cities is a great playground, a great like living lab for testing out theses with climate change. Like if you look at climate change in the city, you will look at architecture. How do we build in the future? You will look at economics. How do people behave differently economically if the world is on fire, or if they live in a city. How can we look at ecology in cities? How does air quality work? What's water pollution in cities, right? You can look at how policymakers influence policy in cities. You can look at energy systems within cities. So I think just for me, when having this like pretty diverse background, which I was in the beginning having like this imposter syndrome, because like I was doing all these different things, but I was like, I'm not good at anything. I'm a Renaissance person. And I realized, well, where's the place where everything comes together? That is in cities. So I think I was looking at my background, looking at my interests, and I'm like, well, it's the natural point of coming together is the city here. And I think that I saw actually the strength of being diverse and not just being a uniform, single educated person. It was more that like I can bring all my things together, and I can look at both the system of climate change, but also then the system of a city coming together. Yeah, and I think I was afraid in the beginning that I had all these different interests, but nothing come together. And I realized, well, if I looked between the lines, I was like, well, this comes up in cities. Like, okay, water pollution comes up in cities, energy come up in cities, design come up in cities. So it kind of became natural for me to be involved in the space. And then I just felt that the impact in cities was so much greater than any impact through policy. Like you can close off a street in Amsterdam and probably cut emissions by 20% in a week, or 5% in a week, or 10% in a week, versus if you're going to write the agreement that's going to happen internationally, that's going to take 10 years to cut the emissions in the same street. So I think it was just effectiveness, background from different subjects, and seeing that in the end, cities was where it all comes together. So yeah.
Yeah, no, oh my gosh. And I mean, like that in itself is super like that definitely resonates because like I'm trying to figure out what I kind of want to do in the future. And it's like I definitely want to go into policy work because I see like that as having the most impact. But then, like after speaking with you, it's kind of like my interests are also quite interdisciplinary, and that's been kind of like a source of anxiety for me in terms of like, am I being a jack of all trades and a master of none, and something like that. But like, and also like that saying kind of like in itself says that it's better than like to be a master of none or whatever. Like just going into all these different things is better than being just a master of one or something like that. I don't remember how it goes exactly, but that's so true in terms of climate work because of just how interdisciplinary the effects are. And so like in order to get into this, I feel like yeah, no, definitely it's really important to know all these things and how they interact with each other.
And you can still I think you can still be a specialist within one field within this like area. Like there's so many people, like you can be an architect in the city and you only focus on like the built environment, or you can be an water pollution expert, right? I think what I'm focusing on is the green and green infrastructure. And that's just because I realized what's for me most directly connected to the climate crisis and resilience. And I realized, well, green infrastructure can work with resilience. Green infrastructure can contribute to lower carbon sequestration. So I just found it to be a place where everything comes together, and then you can still have your specialization. Don't be afraid to be broad at first, but then like you find your passion and you realize that okay, it's green, it's energy, it's water, it's design, it's humans, it's health. I think what we especially do at our lab at the MIT Senseable City Lab is that we're pretty good at just trying out things. It's the city's laboratory, and once we have the technological tools, the sensors, and the data, we can then experiment even more and look for patterns, and from the patterns look for solutions.
Yeah, no, I definitely love to go into some of those solutions, I guess, that we speak of in terms of like how I mean like what are some of like your favorite nature-based solutions, and I guess like how have they been successful in enhancing climate resilience, and also like you focus on I guess like hyperlocal initiatives as well, and I'd love to go into that aspect of your research too.
Yes. So in terms of my nature-based solution approach, well, I think nature-based solutions is, of course, the best thing we can do. It's towards what we call a low-tech future. So it's also fun because, of course, at our lab, we also are champions of high-tech futures, like thinking of using data to create this what's called a real-time city where we can collect data and then use it right away. But I think nature-based solutions also make sense because if we think of Earth as a company which has existed for 3.8 billion years or so or more, think of then how there's always been processes. It's been redefining. Forests have been improving. Nature's been improving. Watersheds has been improving. All of this. So it's kind of like a company having a research and development team for the last 3.8 billion years, which is far longer than any other company or any other technologically driven company has done. So I think looking into nature, we can look into the best experts in research and development through evolution. Of course, I think just that's a great way to do it. But let's go into the question here. I think, of course, I'm biased now towards green walls because I spent the last 3 months looking at the effect of green walls. But I think there's so many other things that are also super impactful. I think with coming from Norway, we just had rising floods and like floods these last weeks. And I think simple tools that can be applied in cities to combat floods, for instance, is having salt marshes, having what's called bioretention areas. So creating pond systems and creating like wetlands. So you wouldn't say you're creating an artificial wetland, you're creating a real wetland within the city, but you can still construct it and put up the factors that would make it successful. But I think that's going to be more interesting. We're going to have sea level rise across major cities. Amsterdam is already under the water. So creating natural bioretention areas is extremely important. And that also comes to the fact that when you think of what you call it, like the pavementization of the world, or like the concretization of the world, how more and more places in the world are becoming places of concrete and cement and pavement, how places that usually would have natural runoff through storms or rain, like that would usually be a park or a pond or a like small green patch, has now turned into a pavement, which does not take in the water, right? Where does that water go? It probably collects somewhere. So then I think we have to take an active step of moving away from this pavementization and instead make cities green through bioretention areas. I think a good example and something I often use as a case study when I tell other cities about NBS, so nature-based solutions they can implement. It's in Berlin, in an area called Rummelsburg, they kind of have this concept called a sponge city. And a sponge city is very interesting because essentially if you have the issue of urban heat and urban heat islands and how pavement makes cities warm, but there's still going to be rain, so it's kind of, you can never win. So then what they made is in the sponge city is that they have all these bioretention areas. They kind of designed this neighborhood with thinking of nature-based solutions. So they were like, where can we have park space? Where can we have green space? Where can we have trees? And then the bioretention ponds, which then would, instead of going to sewage systems, you would then collect the water within these green pockets, keep the water there in the soil and in natural, let's say, storing facilities. And then when it gets warm, you will both then have the water evaporate. So it would be a natural cooling system, which would then lower the temperature in the area just by releasing the water. It would also then have a plus because also then, while both having this natural cooling system, you would also have a green space, which would contribute to carbon sequestration and improvement in air quality. So I would say my biggest wins is, of course, this aspect of a sponge city, but also just integrating nature. A lot of places, there's so many waste spaces where we don't have nature. Yeah, green roofs, green walls, all these things, which now can be proven through science to be significant. That's kind of like what we're pushing for now. Like, we have the data, this makes sense. It's just go for it. And I think policymakers just sadly have to see like the economic aspect, which is kind of hard, but I think there is a very strong economic aspect as well behind a lot of these things.
Oh, that's super cool. Yeah, no, I get really excited when we talk about sponge cities because like I'm like that was kind of my entry into climate stuff. Surprisingly, like I had watched this like TED Talk, I think when I was in like 4th or 5th grade or something, about sponge cities and like, you know, using cities as a kind of way to adapt to climate. So like that's just, I love talking about that stuff. And I mean, you're also like undertaking on top of that like your environmental management masters. Can you talk about like more about what environmental management entails and kind of like what drew you to this as well?
Yeah, so I love my master's. I think it's a great program in New Haven at Yale. A lot of people ask me what environmental management kind of means and what this is a degree, because a lot of people think I'm just doing a management like at the business school, which is not, absolutely not. You can take course at the business school, but it's not so much that you're going to manage money and that part. It's more that you're managing what they say, it's ecosystems. So you're managing ecosystems, human systems, energy systems, urban systems. So we have there's one main degree, which is then the environmental management degree, and then we have, I think it's 8 or 9 specializations, which is like energy, it's humans, it's urban, it's economics or like policy, it's business. So what I think they mean with this name urban environmental management is that you're managing an ecosystem. You're managing how nature and capital and business and people interact. At least in the urban specialization, we're focusing on, right, how do we manage cities in climate change? If you're doing the business, you're working on how do you manage businesses in climate change? If you're doing the people, you're working with how can you manage people and migration and connection and community in climate change. So it's a very it's a degree where you kind of like have this first opening eco and how do you manage the ecosystem in general, and then you can go into specializations. And as I said, I found that cities was the best part where I could. That's kind of what I wanted to manage. I was thinking of doing business in the beginning, as working before with in consulting as well. So I was thinking perhaps I want to lead like the green transition within business, but I was too kind of creative, I would say, and too passionate about design and interventions at the scale that I could see, so the neighborhood scale. So I was like, okay, I think urban is going to be a good specialization. I can then test out theses. I can work with local stakeholders, and you can kind of see the change. You can, of course, see the change in the business as well. But I think if you work in the city, you can actually see the change happen over 5 or 10 years. So yeah, it just came as a degree where I was hoping for a degree where I can actually learn to like work in a multidisciplinary setting, to manage an ecosystem, to manage cities, and to be great design for good. And I think that's kind of what I'm doing now. And I'm starting my second year. I'm super excited and hoping so many other creative and fun people apply to this degree, because it's kind of a jumping board into, or a stepping stone into, further climate work.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's something that I've looked into myself and it seems super exciting. I guess like I'd love to go into kind of like what you've learned so far and what has been, I guess, like particularly valuable for what you do as an urbanist and climate adaptation strategist.
Yeah, so I think at first I was a bit skeptical, because first semester you have kind of 4 foundational courses, which is economics, physical science, ecology, and social science. I was kind of like, well, I'm in grad school, I want to choose my own courses, right? But then I was like, oh, economics again. I had that at my undergrad. I kind of want to be done with that part. Like, I'm doing design now and I'm doing cities and all. I don't understand why we're doing economics or why we're doing physical science. Of ecology, I couldn't understand, but in the way, I think number one, it was to have a same baseline of conversation, which what you're in with your peers.
Mhm.
Like, we all know we're talking about the nitrogen cycle. We all know we're talking about climate financing through incentives in economics. So it was more like having this basic conversation, and I think that was a good start to the program. And then that perhaps it wasn't the most it was good to have that scientific background and knowledge. But I think what's helped me the most has been courses that I've taken at schools beyond the School of the Environment. So at Yale, you're lucky to cross-register between schools. I had school at the School of Public Health, one class at School of Law, one at the School of Architecture. So again, trying to like mirror who I am as a person, as a multidisciplinary person, trying to limit and mirror that in my education. I think perhaps the school had a class at the law school where we had to work with a client, which was a client in Brooklyn. Was really fun. It was a class where we could like have our practice, which like we all had different knowledge. It was a small team, and then we could come together and be like, we're looking at this neighborhood, we're working with just transition. They were like, okay, what are ways we can build community wealth? What are ways we can have nature-based solutions that are fair and just for other people? So then it was, what I learned was that, of course, we can come with interventions, but they can be unjust. They can work against the local community. So I think what I learned is that some of these interventions, which if they're not rooted in community support, are going to fail.
Mhm.
We also plan cities. If we just go into a place, we ask them to give feedback and they write post-it notes about what they want. If it kind of ends there, it's going to be, of course, lack of trust. I think if you want to have success in the urban scale, you have to work with the people who are in the cities every day. Like, we cannot come in as external consultants and just think we're going to solve the world. Like, I think we have to work with the ones who are there already. I think that's kind of ways that I was also humbled my first semester. I thought that we were like these creatures who can come in and just solve all the problems. So of course, we're like, that's not the case. We don't live there. We don't know anything about the area. I think I learned to really deeply value local stakeholders, far greater than our own knowledge, to be honest. And then of course, our knowledge was supplemental to what they already knew. And then our job was just to actually design intervention. If they said, oh, I think it's extremely warm in these streets, well, okay, perhaps you would look into expanding the urban tree canopy
Mm-hmm.
as the intervention based upon the insight that you gave us, not because we came in and looked at the satellite data, because you actually told us like this corner hotspot is super, super warm. Perhaps we wouldn't know that if we didn't talk with them. So I think this combination of stakeholder engagement, the science and data we have, and then merging that together into creating solutions that are going to last longer than just a week.
Yeah, no, definitely. Being aware of like what like you're actually impacting for sure. That's something that's really important. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Yeah, I'd also love to. I mean, I guess like this is kind of going back into like green walls and the amazing stuff about that. Like, can you go into like what's particularly exciting to you about green walls and the other stuff that you're working with?
Yes. So the reason I decided to focus on green walls because I often walk around cities and I just feel like there's so much wasted space. And I think, of course, sometimes you kind of need that empty space to, I mean, you want to see that as well composed of different factors and of different visuals. You don't want to be too similar all over. But I was walking around, like a lot of this space is just wasted. It's empty roofs, it's empty walls. And green walls has kind of been on my mind for a long time as a nature-based solution that you could implement. But I was just thinking there's so much wasted space on modern architecture that doesn't really do anything.
Mhm.
So I wonder, can that space be used? And if it's going to be used, then we should have a strong and clear argument that it is a significant benefit for the people who's going to live there. So then I was starting to research. I was like, well, we can look into green walls in Amsterdam. We want to test it in actual green walls out there and look at the air quality around. But of course, naive as I was, I didn't know that there were so many factors you have to think about. You have to think about the airflow, the people, the car traffic, the congestion, like all these things would impact our results. So then when I found out that our lab had like this testing facility by the airport that was like a replica of a street that we actually could test this, I was super excited because then we can actually isolate the pollution source. That's the only thing that would impact your green walls. So we did some testing first in R with like wind and see if the wind patterns were the same both places, and they were. So okay, we know that wind wouldn't be an issue. And then started testing. We did the same tests. We tried to see if green walls could actually have an impact. So yeah, crunching numbers now in R, but they're looking very good. But yeah, I think I'm so excited by green walls because we already have the space. We don't have to build anything, like we don't have to build any new space or new buildings. Can be, I mean, green walls also come in two forms. So it's natural green walls, which is kind of like ivies and vine grows up, or you can do constructed green walls or built green walls, which is the one you like often put outside a wall. And like as with solar panels and with other green technologies, it's getting cheaper and cheaper like every single month. So I was thinking, well, we have all this space, which is wasted space, in my opinion. We have a climate crisis that is imminent. What can we do? Well, we can use the space to actually create a change for the people living in the streets. I'm like, well, green walls already exist. It's a theory proved concept. We know how to build it. We know how to construct it. We know how to use it, manage it. It's all about getting it done, but then again, proving that it works. So before us, all the experiments or all the tests were only like model based and simulation based and computer programs. So like our test is one of the first that's actually trying to check if green walls work in the real scenario. So hopefully we can then tell developers and policymakers that like, hey, there is actually a significant impact here. And yes, it's going to cost money, but it's going to cost more money if everyone gets asthma or if everyone gets air quality problems and lung problems. So I think for now, it seemed like an expensive intervention, but in 10 years, when people are going to have 50 less visits at the hospital, that's going to save you $500,000, right? So I just found that's a simple, easy, and approachable, and kind of like a concrete way to see an impact in cities.
Yeah, no, definitely. In terms of like, it's kind of like and it's definitely an investment for sure. And I mean, there's like benefits, like I'm sure also definitely like mental health definitely has something like that's kind of another benefit to that for sure, right? Like in terms of green spaces. So, you know, I'm also quite excited about green walls and discussing this. But yeah, no, I mean, in addition to kind of like, you know, being an urbanist, you also like work as like a Gen Z consultant, both of us with Juve, and I think like you had recently done this project with Coachtopia. Yeah, and I guess like I'd love to talk about, you know, like, you know, how you work with corporations as well in corporate strategy in terms of like, you know, like sometimes corporations have like, you know, worked like they kind of go on a spectrum of greenwashing sometimes rather than like, real impact, which is what Gen Z wants. And so like I guess like what does it take and what are some of the challenges that you've been navigating in terms of getting corporations from, like blah 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 to like real impact?
Oh, yeah, that is a good question. And of course, we both work at Jeeves. We've both kind of been in this space in terms of dealing with businesses that are facing pushback. So I think what we, of course, first of all, when Juve chooses clients, we're very certain that the people who we work with are like genuine to have an impact and they don't want to use it for greenwashing. And I think like we've been very strict on our client list because we don't want to work with corporations who don't do good. But of course, let's say we did some work with some bigger consumer brands in Europe. And they were like, well, how can we have an actual impact here? And we of course, we develop ideas. We try to also be pretty bold. Like we know that like maybe half of our ideas is going to be pushed back because they're too crazy or too green. But then of course we present our ideas to people within these mega corporations who are extremely like, they die for this. Like they want to implement this tomorrow, but then they just find themselves trapped in a big corporation and of course supply chain and law and legal departments and research and development. So it's kind of hard to do a lot of the ideas we implement. I think what we do is one thing I ask myself often when I come to an idea, would I like to see this myself? Like, would I be happy if a company did this? And secondly, like how realistic is it? So of course, have some of the crazy ideas, have some ideas where Coach makes their bags out of mango leather and banana leather, because mango leather now exists. You can make leather out of mangoes, right? Then also have some ideas about how Coach can create bags that are circular or reusable or using vegan leather. So kind of have this combination of crazy boldness, which I hope they would want to implement. And if they don't do that, at least do our low stake solution, which is also something that would satisfy Gen Zers. But I think what I'm confident is that we've never given an idea or a PR advice or a communication advice that would greenwash. I think we always, of course, say be transparent. Every client we always have when they ask for an idea, we always just say transparency. If you're going to have one idea, the one idea I want is transparency. I don't care if you're the most polluting company in the world. I mean, I hate that, but please like be transparent. And I think you have a transparent conversations, other people can help you, other people can come with insights. But yeah, I think transparency is always number one. And if you're transparent in your client communications, then that already gives you a lot of credit. And then again, then for the ideas, go for the bold one. And if you can't, go for the low stake one. But I think we both kind of met this like pushback that like, oh, this is too bold. Well, I'm like, well, the planet is also on fire. I don't think it's bold to use vegan leather in all your products anymore. Like that was maybe 10 years ago, but now I think it's pretty fair to use bold ideas and radical change. But yeah, I think we both perhaps felt, I don't know how you think about this pushback if your idea is too radical and how you think. I think the word radical is kind of new, like different now. Like it's not radical to do X because the planet is burning. It's the new normal.
Sometimes it's treated like that though, definitely. Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, I mean, just like thank you for working in this space, like, because it's sometimes kind of frustrating, but like it needs to be done. And yeah, no, that's super cool that, we can push toward like away from greenwashing by, being receptive of those who are interested in that and partnering in that sense. Yeah, you have background in political science and constitutional law. I guess like what are the ways that is, kind of like merging with what you're doing now?
That is a good question. And that's something I always often ask myself. Would I take my bachelor's again? I like my bachelor. I had a good time at my bachelor's, but I think my bachelor's degree was not future thinking enough and not like forward oriented enough. And I often like catch myself like I'm not a biologist or ecologist, and I wish sometimes I was. Like I kind of have this new idea and love for like material ecology, and I was like, oh, I should have studied biology in high school because then I could make buildings that are made out of mushrooms, right? I don't have those skills now. Where I do think the skills I obtained during my bachelor's, like being very systematic, like when you look at law, you have to be very systematic. When you look at issues of social sciences, you have to approach society and politics as a science. Like you're looking at voting patterns, or you're looking at wars, or you're looking at democratic change in Asia as an issue of science. Like, what's the thesis? Why does this happen? Look at for causality or correlation. And I think that's still something that's brought me today. Like, today I'm looking at, well, green walls is very different, but I'm still looking for causality or correlation. Like, are we able to make a clear link between green walls and better air quality? Are we able to make a clear link between the Arabic Spring and the rise of authoritarian rulers in the Middle East? Like, looking at these like correlation, I think is something I've really learned, and I think I try to make the best out of it. Like, of course, I'm studied in even more climate in my undergrad education, but I think okay, I obtained skills in like in research and analysis and systemic thinking and system thinking and system mapping, and just trying to like apply at least some of that knowledge I have. Of course, I looked at politics as a science. Now I'm looking at the environment as a science, but I think you can still like use some of the same tools. So I think it's more so undergrad perhaps doesn't learn the deep knowledge, but it gives you a toolbox that you can use. So you could take some art courses in undergrad. Now I'm like, well, now I can actually use the art, which I before used to do with like voting patterns. You can now do that with green walls. So it's more so that you get the toolbox and now try to apply these toolbox and look for correlations and other things that are completely unrelated to democratic governance in France. But I'm looking at something else, but I'm trying to use the same tools.
I'd love to go into like, I guess, like what inspires you in doing this work? Like, do you have anyone in particular that, you know, you look up to, or any like what are like, I guess, like what influences you in doing this work?
What influences me? I think, well, first of all, I'm from Oslo, but my family is from above the Arctic Circle. So my grandmother, my mom, my grandparents, and ancestors are all from above the Arctic Circle. So they've always lived very much in harmony with nature. My grandma's side of the family used to be like Sami, so they were like doing reindeer management and ecosystem management up there. And then just going up to my grandmother every single summer and seeing the raw nature and seeing this beautiful, beautiful earth we have, I realized that it's not always going to be like this. Norway is, of course, very lucky to be kind of protected from climate change to an extent. We're not going to have extreme heat or extreme cold or extreme rain. But I think you have to kind of go beyond this, like, okay, I'm lucky, the accident of birth. Like, I think we have to look at this as a global issue. But I still try to think of like, okay, how devastated would I be if the place I love the most would be impacted the same way that the global south is, and that would kill me. So I'm thinking, well, some people have the global south, or some people have the Sahel desert as their home. Like I have the north, and they have to feel the feelings that I'm so afraid of feeling. And I think that's kind of this compassion, and like I think we have a moral obligation to help these people. And I think like think of loss and damage debates that are coming up in climate change as well, all these things. I think we have an obligation to help them. Like they're feeling these feelings that we're so afraid to feel. Well, we're feeling it because we were born lucky. That's like, it's just luck.
Mm-hmm.
So one part I think I'm dreaming about is this moral obligation that we're extremely privileged where I come from, and I'll be devastated if something happened to the place I'm from. So I'm wondering what it's like for others. And then I'm also just so inspired by, I think people say, oh, we live too late to explore space, and too late to explore the earth and too early to explore space. But I'm like, there's so many exciting things happening right now as well. There's so many cool scientists and designers and people. Like one of my biggest inspiration, her name is Neri Oxman. She used to work at the MIT Media Lab, which is like a partner lab of the Senseable City Lab at MIT. And she was leading the group called Mediated Matter, essentially creating what's called material ecology. So designing new materials with nature first, designing buildings out of the apple skin, and deciding bricks out of mushrooms, right? So I think I'm very inspired by other people who have a 10 times more science skills than me, who are cooler than me and smarter than me and more passionate than me. And I'm like, I'm so inspired by seeing what they can do with just the power of imagination. It's of course going to be a hard future, but I think with all the talent we have in the world and all the passion we have in the world, we can do so much. So I'm very excited, and I think these people like Neri Oxman are really leading, and I one day hope to be like her, and I think she's doing great work. But yeah, what about you? What inspires you to be in this climate space?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah, no, there's a lot. I mean, definitely that aspect of, you know, like that personal feeling of impact. Obviously, like I feel like my experience can't be separated from climate stuff anyhow. Like even if I wanted to try that, it's kind of like it's not something that you can really get away from. So, you know, I'm kind of like embracing it, you know. I mean, you're also a student. It's kind of like hard to balance that, but I want to, you know, like make sure that, I can do all of this at the same time. And like it's kind of that, yeah, what like the direct impact aspect of it, and also just, like it's kind of like the future that, I and my peers will experience. So yeah, that definitely is a big enough influence for sure. And also just like the community in general is just so supportive, and like that itself is a motivation to, continue to stay in it. So yeah.
Agree. But yeah, there's
Yeah.
so many talented people out there who are doing much more cool and impactful work than I'm doing. I'm doing just work in cities and at a small scale, looking at green walls. But I think there's so many people who are doing amazing work out there, and I think they should be credited. And especially young people who are like out in the streets every single weekend, still after years. Like, I don't protest too much in the street. I hope that they do an impact on the design side and the kind like the actual city side. But I'm so grateful for all these people who are raising the awareness. So when we get the awareness, we can then actually implement the green walls. Without the awareness about climate change, people wouldn't care about green walls whatsoever. So I think you have to have the solidarity between the people who are out protesting and us, and coming together. I'm very hopeful.
Definitely. Yeah. And I will say, like, you were definitely an inspiration for me as well in terms of this work. Like, that's like being completely honest with you, because that's stuff that like I don't get to talk about as much, like often, but it's like really definitely a discipline like that's, merging a lot of my passion. So that's something that's really exciting for me to talk about. I guess to like kind of to close off, like if you could turn back time and tell yourself, something like, I don't know what time you would go back to, but like, without the butterfly effects, what is something that you might like tell them, that you would like something that you might have wished you had known earlier?
I wish, I wish transparently that I was better at math. That's horrible. And I don't think you should need to be good at math to be a good designer to do good change in the world. But where I'm right now, I'm like, there's a lot of things that I could have done if I knew how to do things mathematically or through a more scientific lens. Like, these are things I have to like learn extremely rapidly the summer and this last year. I think if I just started earlier and realized that this could be important in the future, I think that would be something I would probably be very happy of now. But otherwise, I'm pretty satisfied. I think, yeah, just being a bit more, realizing a bit earlier that these are very like serious topics, and it requires a lot of knowledge. And I think it's not going to be easy, and it's not just going to be, I mean, you can work in teams, of course, but I think if you want to have an actual impact, it's good to actually know the science behind it, which is kind of what I'm trying to do now. And I wish I started earlier with that. But I think if you want to have actual impact, you cannot just talk the talk, you have to walk the walk. And I think earlier Carl would have appreciated if we started thinking about the actual why and not just the how. I think that the why part is something I should have learned earlier to understand, and not just doing that. Let's do this, but then why are we actually doing this? And can we actually do this? Does it make sense?
That's so important. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and I guess like for anyone that's, kind of interested in the work that you're pursuing now, what is some, like, I guess, advice or recommendations in terms of like resources that you would give to them?
Ooh, well, I have my personal like nature-based solutions Bible essentially. So a Dutch architecture firm called Felix with two X's. They have a nature-based solution catalog where they have like pages upon pages about interventions one can do, like super simply explained. And I always go back to that when I'm looking like for things to tell clients or people like to implement. I also think, yeah, just reach out to people. Like, I sent so many emails to so many random people and talk with so many interesting people just because I email them and say, hey, let's talk and share knowledge. I think don't be afraid to like cold email and to reach out. But yeah, look into the nature-based solution catalog. Look into design firms, Space 10, which is IKEA's ideation lab. Does amazing work. I think of course, the Senseable City Lab does a lot of cool work. The MIT Media Lab is where I get a lot of my inspiration. But yeah, try to get yourself into this like creative habit of just following accounts that does not just give you fun, but also gives you information. I think you should also have fun. I'm too many hours on TikToks every day, but I think to get some educational content in and follow accounts that could give you inspiration, like, or just go to websites like the MIT Senseable City Lab or Media Lab and look what projects they've done before. Could I do this project myself at home? Think of what's the cheapest way I could do this project, and yeah, I think just and if you have questions, reach out to people. Don't be afraid to ask. I think people love getting a cold email about their passion. Like if they want, like people would love to reply if you're asking something that they are caring about.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's really great advice. Thank you. And I'm definitely gonna check out those resources, and I'll link that stuff down here. It's always so awkward when I do this. Like I do this every episode almost, but it's like still kind of I'm pointing at my legs down here. But yeah. Thank you so much for that. And I guess like for listeners that want to keep up with what you're doing in the future and now, like where can they find you?
You can find me. I mean, my Instagram is just me and myself. That's not very funny. You could follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I post my work, my research. Yeah, Carl Philip Dybwad at my LinkedIn. You can also go to my website, dybwad.work, which is my design and creative website, which is more of like project based. Yeah, and then just send me an email, and I would love to chat and to talk.
Thank you for that. But yeah, no, this has been a super great conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course, thank you so much for hosting and for sharing all your knowledge with the people that are listening. You're doing great work.
Thank you.